the reading series put on by the University of Washington's MFA program in creative writing. Tonight you will hear 3 student readers followed by readings from the graduate of the program as well as a professor. My name is Tim and I will be one of your MCs along with Rachel, who's right here. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Hugo House and especially Christina for letting us gather here one last time. And our bartender tonight is Drew, and she's over there. And please feel free to drink with abandon. Books by alumni and faculty members are available for purchase in the back. You can just talk to Ty and she will hook you up. And then lastly, if you have parked in the Hugo House parking lot, please remember to move your car by 10 p.m. Though we should be done sooner than that. So this is the last Castalia we will hold in this room as it currently stands. After the demolition, the materials that litter the ground and the mere heaps of scrap that used to be the Hugo House will no longer be the Hugo House, and they will be disposed of quickly and with respect as though they were a corpse. I feel as though something similar has happened to me in the course of my MFA, meaning I think my texture has changed. When I first started the program, I was brittle, and now I am more along the lines of mush. Just as a beautifully speckled turkey bean cannot resist the forces that act upon it inside a pressure cooker, so too is an MFA student in fiction unable to outlast his education without springing into a new form of being. So to all my fellows who are graduating with me this June, I would like to pose this question for you. Has the program allowed you to become who you are, or has it allowed you to escape who you are? And whatever we choose, I think a certain amount of reckoning awaits us. So our first reader tonight is Kelly McMeekin, a first-year student in prose. Kelly enjoys keeping score at baseball games and rescuing Shetland sheepdogs from the airport and writing stories about people who are all in the advanced stages of abjectly falling apart. The characters in her work suffer from an intense and often self-created loneliness, yet they are as responsible for their own miseries as they are caught up in the events beyond their control. In other words, their world is a lot like our own. And like in our world, the seriousness of their characters' bonds is what makes their decline mournful and cathartic and meaningful. Her stories ask us to consider how falling apart is a means of letting go. And then also, I understand she's going to be reading an essay today, so none of that applies too much. But anyway, please welcome Kelly McMeekin.
So when I was 5 years old, my mom made me promise I would never use a microphone. We'd made little megaphones at school that day just by like rolling up pieces of paper and taping them together. And when I showed her my like marvelous creation, she gave me this look of complete horror. My mom explained to me that day that there are people who are born normal and there are people who are born drill sergeants, and I belong in the latter category. So I don't use microphones as long as everyone can hear me, hopefully, which I think we're all good. All right, cool. The megaphone incident is one of the few memories I have of my childhood, and the only from preschool or before. Everything else has either been lost due to my uncanny proclivity for head trauma, I've had 5 bad concussions, or just the natural blocking out process that happens as the result of a childhood. My brain has decided it would be better if I did not remember. I'm not sure why I clung to the megaphone memory, of all potential memories. Perhaps because it was the first time that I was confronted with an uncomfortable and unchangeable truth. Something fundamental about me is wrong. As well as the first time I'd ever had something that I created, a piece of art, if you will, criticized. My mother and the recycling bin. There is no purpose for this. It doesn't mean anything. The ending cheating is not justified, etc. Without my own memories, much of what I know about myself as a child has come from childhood journals and scrapbooks and letters I found while rooting through my parents' filing cabinet for my immunizations records while I was applying for college. The letters written between my mother and my preschool teacher are more or less what you would expect. Is my child's development normal? Combined with more serious and difficult undertones. A parent deeply troubled by a daughter her polar opposite. Why does she want a Barbie? Why does she cry so much? Why does she disagree with me about everything? Why is she so sensitive? There's one particular section that has always stuck with me, a section where my mother describes a recent family cross-country ski trip. We probably made it about halfway up the hill when Kelly sat down in the snow and announced she wasn't going any farther. I couldn't do anything to get her moving. I ended up having to wait at the top of the hill for almost 15 minutes before she finally got up and decided to ski again. I just don't know how to handle it when she does this, when she just gives up. It's funny how tempting it is when confronted with a story about yourself being a little shit as a child to try to rationalize your behavior. I was 5, attempting to ski in the Sierras. I was tired and hungry and cold, and even then struggling with depression. I was just a kid. And yet, there's a part of the story that I can't explain away, a part that's uncomfortable because it strikes a little too close to home, to something that I wish I could avoid having to acknowledge, avoid having to own. I'm someone who sits down in the snow and refuses to go any farther. I'm someone who stops. I'm someone who quits. I grew up in the bad section of town. Not the section where kids got shot, but the sections where they crawled through holes in the fence to stand in front of oncoming trains. I don't know what it was, why there were so many of us wearing Livestrong bands up our arms to hide the scars, why we all knew someone who had tried with a belt or a bottle of aspirin, whether it was something in the water or in the air, or just the pressures, the extreme income disparities, the population density, the lack of empty space. Why was it that so many of us thought it was never going to get better? Before they patched up the holes in the fence, before they got volunteers to patrol the tracks, to wait at every railway crossing, before they put up the giant signs with the hotline numbers, I too used to slip through the ivy at the end of my street, used to wait in the shadows until the ground was thrumming beneath my shoes, used to ignore the warning blast of the train horn, and stand too close to the tracks until the sheer rush of the train speeding past would blow me back. Now, I wonder how many of those conductors had nightmares because of me. I recently found a typed note 11-year-old me wrote to my mother, counseling her on her marriage. Dear Mom, lately you and Daddy have been fighting often and acting very grumpy. I think for my whole life you've been setting very bad examples for me and my brother. Maybe if you guys would calm down a little bit, then we would not be so worked up all the time. Just advice, Kelly. If the content of the note wasn't bad enough, just to add insult to injury, it was written in Comic Sans. My parents were married for 30 years before they divorced. Like any child, I can't claim to know too much about their marriage. Even in the most public of marriages, there are still things that go on behind closed doors that, even if you're just outside, just down the hall, you'll still never understand. It wasn't until they finally did divorce, a few years ago, that I found out the first serious discussion about splitting had come when I was 5, the year of the megaphone and the skiing incident. They had agreed then that no matter what, and over the years there were many whats, both public and private, they would stay together for the kids. I hadn't been that far off when I boarded friends before they'd come over for sleepovers. My parents were like divorced people that lived together. My mother, when she came to tell me the news of the separation, was still carrying her wedding ring in her pocket. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, she told me, crying, and I'd been surprised that, after all this time, there was still something left to cry about. Her left hand, worn as it was by years of gardening and hiking and spending too much time in the sun, had a pale tan line around her ring finger. I remember thinking, this is what 30 years of marriage looks like. In childhood drawings of my parents, they are always on opposite sides of the page. I have files of stories I wrote as a kid. Historical fiction about the Civil War or the Gold Rush, fantasy novels based heavily on my favorite books, angsty vignettes about my relationship with my mother. Based on the career sheet from my preschool scrapbook, I decided I wanted to be a writer before I even knew how to write. I'm not sure how much weight to place on this. I also at various times expressed desires to be a painter, a teacher, a film director, and a race car driver. There was even an extended period where I wanted to be a storm chaser and would spend vacations at my grandfather's house in Indiana making shaky handheld video recordings of weather events I deemed atypical, which, given that I grew up in California, included things such as thunder and lightning or just rain. But, unlike what writing, the rest of these dreams eventually faded away. The desire to be a painter was gone by the time I hit grade school and discovered I had no artistic talent to speak of. The film director thing vanished when I realized that a childhood of no TV meant that my knowledge of movies was astronomically below what others would consider normal. Storm chasing was a fad and racing cars hit the giant roadblock of needing money. As for teaching, well, talk to me after June 3rd. When I first got into this program, I felt for the first time that I was surrounded by people like me, people who would spend hours making minute-by-minute plan of what to do in the event of the zombie apocalypse, people who liked words and sounds, people who would put up with each other's eccentricities and peculiarities because Lord knows we all have them. Standing in line for food one day at Friday Harbor, I confessed to my friend I'd run out of my antidepressants and was instantly offered various prescriptions by everyone surrounding us. I thought to myself, everyone always wants to know what it is that we do in a creative writing program, why one would ever pursue an MFA degree of all things. What strikes me after talking to so many of my cohort is how many of us feel like this was our last resort. Either a, I tried to do other things and it has still always come back to this, last resort, or a, I didn't know what else I'd do if it weren't for this, last resort. It seems like no one really wants to be a writer. When I first began to come up with stories, it was for fun. Later, it became therapy. Last week, trying to write a story caused an anxiety attack sent me to urgent care. What's left if you give up your last resort? Sunday was Mother's Day, and Friday was my mother's birthday, which means it's been 1 year since we last spoke. When I'm asked what's caused this fissure, why it is that our relationship has fallen apart, who rejected whom, whose fault it is, I don't have an answer. There was no big falling out. There was no argument. We just stopped. I have one positive memory of my childhood with my mom. In the memory, I'm at home sick, and my mother has taken me outside to be with her while she works in her garden. She tucks a quilt around me to keep me warm, and I drift in and out of a peaceful sleep. Over the past week, I found myself revisiting that memory over and over again. This year, I wished my mom a happy birthday. I didn't wish her a happy Mother's Day. Take of that what you will. I've been thinking a lot lately about quitting. About the difference between seeing things out to the bitter end or getting out while you still can. I've been thinking about the big ways we give up on life, on marriage, on careers, on dreams, and the little, how each decision we make is giving up on a different path. I've been thinking about relationships and what, when we give up, we owe those that we have left behind. I've been thinking about dreams versus hopes and fantasies versus reality. I've been thinking about mental health and how much weight we should give the causes of emotion. I've been thinking about when it is justified to quit and when it is not, and how you know the difference. I've been thinking about snowy hills. I've been thinking about beginnings, but more than that, I've been thinking about endings. There's a silly saying I heard once about a ceramic bowl and when the master potter knows that it is done. It is a question whose answer provides more insight into the answerer's personality than universal wisdom. When does the master potter know the bowl is finished? The maximalist says when she cannot add anything more. The minimalist counters when she cannot take any more away. The egoist insists that the bowl is finished when the master states it is a bowl, while the altruist believes this moment instead lies in the mouth of the outsider who identifies bowl as bowl. The realist, there is no master. The nihilist, there is no bowl. And then there's my unprofound contribution. The master potter never knows that it is done. One day she pushes back from her pottery wheel and stands and walks out of the room and never goes back. And the villagers either say that she couldn't take it anymore or that she'd already taken too much, that she was too hardworking or she didn't know how to work, that she cared too deeply or she didn't care enough. And maybe she herself wonders whether it was the right decision, but maybe she doesn't. None of that matters. In the end, there's just the leaving. In the end, there's just the bowl.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm about to cry, and that was wonderful. I'm sad that this is our last Castalia in the Hugo House, but it's been a really wonderful year here. And I'm excited to introduce our final first-year reader of the year, Aya Gold. Aya Gold has a golden eye for evocative detail. No, really, she does. In her collages of imagistic fragments, Aya transfigures her careful attention into visceral disembodiment. In her poems, a man's hands might become a dead fish. A woman's lips might bloom with cherry blossoms in the dead of winter. Throughout, her use of Japanese cultural details integrate a rich multicultural valence into her work. And her acuity of thought and clarity of emotion make for compelling, urgent poems. Please join me in welcoming Ayagol.
Thanks everyone for being here. I have 3 poems to share with you tonight. This first one is inspired by Frank O'Hara's In Memory of My Feelings, which starts with the line, "My quietness has a man in it," which is not an experience I can honestly say I totally understand, but I can imagine different people having all sorts of different creatures living in their emotions. So this poem references one by Ezra Pound, which has a French title, which in English means Portrait of a Lady. And it's a poem in which he argues that there is nothing worse than a woman with culture. So, rabbits. There's a bundle of rabbits living inside her nervousness, and the friction of their fur sparks through her. Her friends don't know what she means by this, which makes her rabbits all the more twitchy. She's 17. A magazine advised her to eat chocolate and read poetry if she's on her period or getting over her stupid ex-boyfriend. Neither of these dilemmas is hers, but she guesses they're allegories, so she leans into her hammock with a bag of chocolate chips and pound from her father's shelf, which she ruffles open to find Portrait d'une femme. No rabbits there. Hers hide their ears back as she pictures the woman's mind sailing away without the rest of her. Leaf lights glow green on her legs. Ants trek up the tree carrying snacks heavier than themselves. They can do this, she remembers, because the cross-section of the muscles increases as the square of length, whereas bodies grow as the cube of length, which is why she can't lift weights. It's like a bungee cord. You'd trust a thick bundle over a long one if you were to jump off a bridge. The leap must be fast, she thinks, toward the blue lines of the river. Her rabbits huddle closer in the blackberry bramble. This next one is called Caracara, which is the name of a citrus. It was inspired by a time when a friend turned to me and said, "What is a caracara?" I was like, "Oh, well, let me tell you." I know all about produce. This poem is all one long sentence. The poet Mary Oliver once told a story at a reading about being on a plane, and she saw the person sitting next to her reading poetry, and she was watching, and they would follow along until they reached a period, and then they would stop and they would turn the page. So sometimes I think of a sentence as a unit of attention. So if you ever worry that you might lose a reader, you might want to just write one long sentence. Caracara. Peel us this caracara and let's blanket your anger for another time. Another returned daughter to a seashell carpet disappears behind an ear. A father's sun sets and glows the night to moths as the beach claims itself. Could be the citrus that falls in your grasp is each its own lawless town. Pistols and gold, cigar smoke stacked on cigar smoke, shattered bottle brawls, sunburned arms collecting baskets of mountains like dandelions, mosquitoes in the mouths of broad rivers, hooks and lice in salmon gills, owls with pistols of feather hunt the scurry waves in the eyes of rocks. Women all those waves you see and don't see because you want me to step neatly on each shell, but I can only dive into the cold air. I cannot reason with it. I will not reason. I am this night. The owl rush, the claws that feel out the hunger. True story, I didn't know how to pronounce salmon or gills until today. I had to ask my girlfriend to make sure I wasn't mispronouncing anything. Okay, so I have one last poem for you. when I was writing this, I was thinking about how I get lost really easily. And this memory came back to me at a time when it snowed and I was not used to seeing snow. I had never seen snow like this before. And this happened to be the one day that my friends couldn't walk home from school with me. But I said, it's okay, I got this. I know what I'm doing. Because also, I guess I never knew how to honestly tell people that I don't know how to do things. So I was walking alone, and then, of course, I took a few wrong turns, and I ended up a few neighborhoods over. And I was standing there in all this snow and this like unrecognizable landscape. And I remember this documentary that I had just seen about a family that got caught in an avalanche. And the only reason the baby survived was because the mother ate all the snow so that she could stay hydrated so she could produce milk. So by the time a responsible adult came to find me, I was standing in front of a post office and crying and eating snow by the handful. But yeah, as I was writing this poem, it ended up not being about me at all. And ultimately, it's based on a character from Shakespeare's Scottish play.
Macbeth.
Okay, don't say that. Okay, all right, well, let's hope that didn't curse anyone. Okay. Lady M. With each flicker of the lantern, she pauses. The witches might be coming, but it's just the wind. Her husband retreated to their chambers hours ago, leaving her to clean his mess at the dinner table, to blot the questions from the open faces of their guests. Men are constant rage, they all knew, but were too polite to do anything but look expectantly at her. What a waste. The bowl of fruits he flipped, scattering apples and grapes, walnuts catapulted across the room, spilled wine slipping from the edges of the tablecloth. Splatters on marble tile and perfect footsteps. Deep purple on white, stains like a pansy unclenching its petals. She imagines him asleep in their bed, his face ripening to that same horrid color of pansies. She never liked his face. When he was young, he had the courtesy to shave his beard, speak sparely, and walk 3 paces behind her. But now, the quiver in his throat like a dying swallow, the slabs of fingers a parody of decisiveness. Why did the witches appear for him and not for her? His mind's as sharp as a bowl of warmed milk. She's done rinsing her hands, but can't bring herself to return to bed. He'll touch her, she's certain, the way a hungry babe reaches for its mother, desperate and unlovable. She should have never come to this castle. But then again, she's always had a terrible sense of direction. Like the first time she woke into a blizzard. Impatient to cut through the air, she pulled on her mother's coat and wandered until she reached a line of pointed houses on the churchless side of town. An old woman with a roar of white hair drifted out of the smallest house with no shoes on, brindled dress drinking the light around her. She placed a hot hand on the child's shoulder. The woman's hand smelled like stew, although the girl couldn't identify the meat. "Do you think you're going back to your mother?" she laughed, leaning scratchingly close, her wrinkles like ripples in night water. "I have no mother." The girl dropped her coat in the snow. More than any crown, what the girl desired was the power to foresee it and walk barefoot in a storm. When the woman turned toward her door, they were still touching. Off the ground, the girl's feet lifted and her footprints vanished. She followed the woman in as the house swung on its hinges. Thank you.
Thank you, Wyatt. So our next reader, Catherine Cole Rogers, is something of an unorthodox MFA student in that she has managed to do the impossible, which is convince the university to allow her to finish her degree in 3 years instead of a mere 2. But besides this enormous feat, her short story, Concrete Desert, was published in the journal Intersections in 2007 and she was the recipient of an Artist Trust grant due to a play she wrote titled Stalking Rainbows. Recently, she has been at work on a screenplay called Original Intentions, which she workshopped this year. And please welcome Catherine Cole-Rogers to the stage.
I'd also like to thank Linda's poetry workshop people. Thanks for letting me sit in this quarter. And it's interesting, the word that came to me was joy. So thank you all. Appreciate it. But now I'm going to go to prose, which is something I know a little bit more about. This is an excerpt from a novel I'm working on called Iron Wings, and the year is 2050. Winnie asked, "So where do you think Blaine is now?" Wagahisa smiled a strange sort of smile and said delicately, "We're not entirely sure. That wicked Viking killed over 23 million people in the outbreak, and we have only vague rumors of his whereabouts, 30 years worth to be exact." The doctor delicately folded his wings in his lap. He was rumored to be near Madagascar in the Seychelles, but then again 3 days ago, someone claims to have seen him near Trondheim. He both hates and thrives on conflict. I think he's grown tired of living on a boat. Blaine's older now, in his late 50s. He's always been worried about his soul, about his image, that he's been misunderstood. I think he's headed to the Holy Land. The CIA thinks not. They think he's around here somewhere, and they may be right. Lubumbashi isn't a bad guess. Winnie felt a trickle of sweat creeping down her neck. She ran her hand over her forehead and was surprised when a lock of hair stuck to her temple. She knew it was time to wrap up the interview. She had one more question. "Did you lose anyone in the outbreak?" Wagahisa's chin fell forward. For a moment, he no longer looked like a crane. Instead, he looked like what he was, a very old man. For the first time, Winnie noticed the age spots on his head. They were unpleasantly dark and stood out through his wispy white hair. His voice was raspy as he said, 23 million people died horribly. Many lingered for days, enduring the likes of Ebola, scarlet fever, and anthrax. The Earth cannot sustain 12 billion people. Our planet is dying. All right, I agree. But there are people who say what he did was eugenic. I say it was dyseugenic. You can always do something in exaggeration like Blaine. Vikings aren't all that different from Germans. The Third Reich went overboard because they did not have the guts to decide who was really useless. It was dyseugenic because Jews and Asians are more intelligent than blue eyes and blonde hair. That's the real tragedy. The simple fact is that Blaine should have attacked Africa. There's a gene you can check for brain development, and that gene is not present in those populations. The more such populations are allowed to multiply, the likelier it becomes that they will pollute the gene pool and so impede human progress. When you checked the steno on her e-system, yes, that is precisely what he said. In disbelief, she replied, "Your premise is based on speculative research that was found untrue a long time ago. As you well know, all humankind came out of Africa." The doctor was silent. He watched her carefully. Winnie's brain told her that her next question was neutral, but she found her voice quivering with anger as she asked, "You indicated that Blaine was a racist. What does that make you?" Crane smiled and leaned back in his chair. don't interbreed, and I'm quite sure humans shouldn't either. One day soon, we as a species will need to determine if we are to save the planet or die. I have a book that will be published soon. It's called Engineered Evolution. It promotes the idea of elimination of unnecessary genetic stock that contributes to less qualified progeny. Winnie watched as Waukesha's eyes narrowed to a pair of slits. Excuse me for being indelicate. I am an indelicate man. I am in no way advocating genocide. There are only two approaches to solving the problem of overpopulation and inferior genes. One is to rein in birth rates in the developing world. I would advocate no births, but given human nature, that would prove to be impossible. So let's just rein them in, say, one live birth for every 15 to 20 females. Encourage those who offer better genes to multiply freely. Of course, these would be monitored, and if the fetus is found defective, it would undergo either elimination or, in special cases, DNA renewing. The other approach, very simply, is for people to die when they should die. Life is not sacred. If you are no longer useful, you should go. Wagahisa's eyes gazed into Winnie's. She blinked, but held her tongue. I can see the judgment in your eyes, Miss Nam. I know I am an old man. My time is up. It's been up for quite a while. Bora Bora, my second wife, would have said, she was the meanest of my wives. I got rid of her. The doctor admitted a high trend. Divorced my little one, divorce. I didn't kill her. He laughed some more until his laughter turned into a snort. I know I can barely see these bioanatomical contacts help, but they're such a nuisance. My inner ears are mostly plastic. I have stiff knees, especially the left one, and I can assure you I am quite tired of getting up during the night, every night, even though I've had an operation for that too. Wari Wari, my fourth wife would have chanted. She finally died, thank God. Defective heart monitor, ha! The third one ran off with a salesman. That too was a good reviews. The crane sounded loopy now and fluttered his hands. He paused, and the air, despite the hum of the fan, grew even more still as he said, "You see, there was only one woman I ever truly loved. That was my first wife. She was a beauty." Wagahisa's voice was barely audible as he said, "I loosened the desk on the pencil." The crane's red eyes again looked straight into Winnie's. "You can check if you like." Winnie gently shook her head no. The doctor smiled. "I've made 2 trips to Exit, one time in Paris, then again in Tokyo. You've heard of it, nice little company. They have shops around the world. Their specialty is a tasty cocktail of sodium benzoate. Well, couldn't do it. You know why, huh? You know what keeps me here alive? Do you take a guess?" Winnie realized her mouth was wide open. She closed it and said, "Your spirit." The crane fidgeted with his white sleeve. He brushed non-existent lint from his knee. He sniffed unpleasantly and held a bony wing against his chest. For an uncomfortable moment, he stared blankly at the domed container. He then looked straight into the roving camera and said, "I would hate to leave the world before that Viking, before that wicked bastard, that Blaine, before he has been caught and executed." Winnie realized her headache had increased and she felt sick to it in her stomach. She knew the last bit had been full of drama, just what the network looked for, but the doctor was so frighteningly odd. Why had Wiley insisted she meet with him? The room began to spin a bit as she quickly ended the interview. "I would like to thank Dr. Benito Wagahisa for his time and his hospitality." She looked in his direction. "I appreciate you speaking with Global United." Into the camera she said, "This is Winnie Nam, coming to you from Ethiopia." It was time to leave. She quickly caught and bagged up the oval cameras and drank a glass of water along with some pills from her pack. As the screen door slammed behind her, she had an eerie premonition that something was wrong. Some evil was lurking among the yellow woods. When she reached the vehicle pod, she heard a noise that made her look back towards the blue brick house. The crane was at the window. His skinny gray arms had pulled up the blinds, and he held up a large poster of an Asian woman with 2 children. The colored photograph was held together by 4 deep creases. Foxing had caused the edges to curl and gave the picture a scraped look. This discoloration did not take away from the family pictured. If anything, the youthful expression of the mother was increased. She wore a cherry-blossomed kimono. The boy tucked in beside her wore a uniform from school, and the baby, safe in her arms, lay bundled in a soft blanket of pink. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick intermission, get some drinks, get some books, and we'll be back in 10. Okay. So now it's time for our alumni leader tonight, who I'm very excited to introduce. We have poet Katie Ogle with us tonight. So Katie may have graduated from UW's MFA program back in 2010, but she has remained involved in the most scenic aspects of the creative writing program through her teaching at the Friday Harbor Marine Biology Quarter, organizing the amazing Friday Harbor Symposium that many of us have gone to, and teaching in the summer creative writing program in Rome. Nice one, Katie.
Sounds like.
Yeah, I think I'm going to model my post-MFA career on Katie Ogle. And then I'm going to grow my hair out and get some bigger glasses and walk around town impersonating her. Sounds good? Cool. No, I'm not going to do that. The thing is, Katie writes really great poems, too. When I heard her read last year at Friday Harbor, she introduced me to the idea of the homunculus, which is, have you guys heard of this? It's this idea that there's like this little man inside your head. You know about that, Cameron? What is it?
It's a little man.
Exactly. It's like this little consciousness inside your head that is controlling. I don't know, Katie can tell you about it. Anyway, it totally blew my mind. As did her poetic explorations of scientific paradigms, her thrilling neo-Dickensian conceits, and all of the other explorations that she engages. So please join me in welcoming Katie Ogle.
Rachel, I'm married to you. I just wrote down thrilling neo-Dickensian conceits. It sounds awesome. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to read. This is not very cool of me to say, but it has been a dream of mine to be back as a woman. So. And I did have a fake out, I'll have to call out the Castalia crew. I think a year ago I got an email that was like, Katie, could you really just send us your bio since you're reading on Wednesday? And I was like, nobody asked me to read on Wednesday, and actually I'm teaching a class. So I think that's probably the reason that you guys had to ask me this time, but I'm very, very pleased to be here. Oh, I was gonna write down the time so I don't telling time. Both of the hands are in the same place. That's 8:45.
It's 8:42. You're doing great.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. Real good. I'm really excited to be reading here at the Hugo House one last time. I've gotten to read here a number of times, and it feels like home, and has always felt like home. So I'm sure something great is going to come in its place, but it's nice to be here. I was thinking about tonight, as you guys are sort of expounding on the lastness of it all, especially facing graduation, some like great last words that people have had, and my favorite is, and I don't even think this is true, but it's just so good, it's the last words that Oscar Wilde said, or is either the wallpaper goes or I do. Which seems great, especially because the Hugo House has all of these papers posted around that says, do not write line break on the furniture, write on your own furniture, or whatever. But, anyway. I'm going to read sort of a good luck starter poem, my trio day, which I wrote in graduate school, which I have started almost every reading I've ever given with. And I just took a shot of whiskey, so you'll forgive me if I slur. Okay. Not the dandelion, but the part after. An undone tickle of afters which scatter the way pigeons scatter and then gather. Not the dandelion, but the part after. The kind of feel like squeezing a bird disaster. Instead of laughter, lips loose with chatter. Not the dandelion, but the part after. An undone tickle of afters which scatter. I have selected the next couple of poems mostly because I found myself in my English class today saying I am Van Gogh. My students were trying to say that Van Gogh's left ear was hidden in this portrait, but really it was his right ear, so I had to get up, I had to grow into it, and then do this, and then be like, I've got my left ear. And this went on for a while, and I found myself shouting at my students, I am Van Gogh! That sort of made me think about the reading tonight, and who I am. And I selected a couple of poems because I think I'm from Virginia, that is who I am, and I've accidentally written a couple of poems in a southern accent, so I'm going to read those to you.
Yes!
This is called Pushing Up Daisies. If my soul is a potato, as I've estimated size-wise, I will not dig it up just yet. I will worry open everything else in the garden first. But when I do get after it, pell-mell with a till, turning up the soil and whatever else shows, I will grab my soul potato and run. The town is worried I'll let it grow eyes and then twist them out or something else sick like eat it raw. Heavens, my own soul? Of course I've considered it in the way one must practice every possible scenario just to remain prepared. I stop when I reach the creek and set the potato free in the water, but what's this? It won't even take a sip. Once and for all, my soul is no fish. The old horse won't eat. He isn't up for gifts. Ham carrots still appeal, but treats are tricky, how they look like fingers served on fingers. Maybe he's sick by confusion. Horse life isn't supposed to stick at the mind like peanut butter in the mouth. Don't feel is all. Heaves, shakes withers, walks around the barn with no shoes. This one's called Old Dominion, which is the nickname of Virginia. The cure for wanting is holding. The cure for holding is a 5-pound bag of apples. The cure for 5 pounds of apples is a brown paper bag. The cure for the bag is a mask. The cure for a mask is a kiss. The cure for a kiss is whiskey. The cure for whiskey is cinnamon. The cure for cinnamon is being asked if you're the intern. The cure for interns is money. The cure for money is taxes. The cure for taxes is snoozing. The cure for sleep is coffee and light. The cure can fit in your hand. The cure for your hand is nervousness. The cure for nervousness is neurological. The cure for the scan is lying in a tube. The cure for the tube is pipe. The cure for a pipe is regular use in winter. The cure for winter is spring. It's spring again. cure for trees or blossoms. Cure for blossoms, cars parked in the same spot all day. The cure for parking spots is a crime scene. The cure for crime is DNA testing. The cure for the cheek is the swab. The cure for cotton is rain. The cure for rain is to stand in it. I've been sort of collecting these sort of list poems like the one I just read. So this one is called Short Films, and it's just a bunch of ideas for short films. Toads making love. Zipper up on an easy coat. Pepper eating contest. A child trying to sleep after daylight savings. Gas station woman says, I love bleach. It's cheap and it kills anything. Rat crossing a vacant lot in a hurry. Ladybug in the bird bath. Testimony of the pilot, testimony of the flight attendant. The invention of the fork. Scraping sticker residue off the jacket of a book. Another failed attempt at a Guinness World Record longest daisy chain. How to fold a fitted sheet. God damn it. That's not in the poem, but really. What happens to unsorted recycle bins? Drafting a drawn-on eyebrow. Supermarket clerk guessing the occasion. There's this guy at the Bartels. Gabby, maybe do you know this guy? The Bartels in Ballard. And every time I check out, he's always like going on a trip. He just specializes in things that people need to go on trips. He always thinks he's going on a trip. He's a different kind of trip.
Going on a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, always. This poem comes from Friday Harbor, which Rachel mentioned. It's called Lab Report Northern Clingfish. And I absolutely just ruined my students' lives by explaining to them what the clingfish is the other day, which is that the clingfish has evolved its pelvic fins, and here's what happened. I said, pelvic fins. And I just waited during this until they would acknowledge me, which they finally did. So their pelvic fins evolved into a suction cup, and they have this amazing capacity for suction, which is why they become interesting to the scientists at Friday Harbor Labs. Their suction is something like 300 times a man-made suction cup, and they can attach to things that are slimy and wet and uneven. There are all kinds of engineering applications. Anyway, I'm interested in this fish. This is called Lab Report Northern Clingfish. It starts with two hypotheses. Hypothesis 1. If clingfish have evolved to stay stuck to rocks no matter the change, then tidal subtlety would render their most famous feature useless. Hypothesis 2. If an egg rolls on a countertop, then it does so wildly. To graph the tides, assume the earth is yoked to some larger egg. Assume the moon. The clingfish evolves a suction cup to manage the difference, must stick to stay in one place as the water comes in, goes out, comes in. And how do I deal with tides? Well, sir, I cry. If the sea is salty, all the better for disguise. A shark grows a new row of teeth every 28 days. Dentition and menstruation are on the same cycle, go figure. The figure is always some sort of circle, the better for section. I've got a Venn diagram for you. Spit in the sense of saliva, spit in the sense of a tongue-shaped landform. Only dry word for miles. So I didn't send Abby really anything for my introduction, so Rachel wrote it herself, which was really nice of her to do, which means that she already introduced my homunculus poems. So the homunculus, Latin for little man, I have interpreted it as the little man that lives in my head and tells me what to do. This is a longer series that I've been writing for a long time, ever since I got a really bad headache like 2 or 3 years ago that I've had ever since. Recently, I found out the Danish term for hangover it's little carpenters hammering in your head, which is how I feel most of the time with this little guy. So I'm reading this tonight to shake him by his little shoulders. I hope we can get this book finished soon. I apologize if you've already heard this. So I'm going to read the first couple minutes of this series. It's a series of poems that, in a form that I invented, they're all exactly 60 words, meaning the idea is that the form of the poem sort of simulates the suffocating claustrophobia that the homunculus must feel in my head. And this part follows the moment that I realized the homunculus is in my head until a few steps into the dentist. I know everybody thinks they have the worst dentist in the world, but I have the worst dentist in the world.
Dollar Dental Clinic?
No, Creation Dentistry. I hate that guy. I don't know where I just need to go to him. Anyway, this guy's the worst. I didn't notice him at first, or ever, until he started to wiggle a little in my mind. At first, I thought a headache. For weeks, I pressed in on my temples. I was a tender fruit, and then he spoke. You awake? He taps at me from the inside. A sense tickles that someone snuck up, and my hairs follow. I feel scared and nothing to do about it. Stared at, scared cat. What's the gap between fear and action? The back door found open. I grip the knife meant specially for peeling and stand still as a blade. Do something, he says. The knife is our only light. Go on. Nothing's there. My body as house has lost its locks. The homunculus is the little man who lives in my head and says, stop copying me, when I say, stop copying me. Or maybe he said it first. This is the problem. The little way I check in with myself, the voice that sounds like mine, has a body too. And it's a man, imagine that. Not alone after all. Everyone has a homunculus, the internal puppet who lives in your skull. He's about the size of your finger. He eats what you eat. He watches the world through your eyes like it's a movie. When you ask your body a question, it replies beyond a throb. That's him. Call it your conscience, many do. Shoulder devil, shoulder angel. Mine continues to tap in the mornings until I wake. When I open my eyes, he says, that's what I call natural light. Whether or not this has always been the case, I can't remember, but it feels familiar, like November's nestling in, or birthdays after a while. I suppose he's been here all along, a rock in my shoe. Morning coughs. Hard to know whether to say, bless you, or I heard you. The wall clock snaps its fingers. The pillow has acoustics to the pounding ear, and the legs are rather famous to the bed. I sort my hairs, still on board from jumped ship. One batch latched end to end like bed sheets tied as an escape rope. So why are you a man, I ask. If you're the me before becoming, then why aren't we the same? No one likes sickly narrators, my dear. Suppose I do picture a man when I hear the word boss. But bossy, now that's a lady. I'm a bit of both, I always thought. Counts for the newfound man in me. We carry on while I dress, brush my teeth, and they come out bloody and clean. He's the only one that knows I still call the hamper the hamster, but just to myself. I love the lifelong jokes. I leave the house with a bubble in my chest. The homunculus calls it a burp gone rogue, and I believe. After all, he's some sort of captain in my body, privy to inside information. Everything's another poem now. Wonder what it all looks like. How many pieces of chewing gum I've swallowed for experiment's sake that haven't quite served their sentences. I catch the bus with an eye on my skin like never before. He growls, you know, you've got a lot of nerve. Even if I can't have a private thought, I still won't always speak to him directly. It gives me some control. I pull in the blinds and watch a man kick his yellow jelly bean far away. When I give that line, he laughs. He's laughing now. At least he finds me amusing. We got a little thing going on here. A girl in the same posture as a coat on a peg makes her way back in the bus. What's she suffering about? He says without sympathy. I notice her swollen eye. I want to give her a story. Bitten. No one to solve her itch. The eye doctor no help. Skin specialist no use. The eyelids are no man's land. Everyone is lonely about something. The word alone is a twofer, like me, for all one. I have to get the hang of my own plural body now. I've sensed it before, how I have to explain things to myself. But how? Yoo-hoo, you're a nesting doll? Tragic. People love the tiniest one best. Here come all the woes. There's an algorithm for this sort of thing. One could calculate how often my shoulders lean into one another and say, let's have a little cry. And then what? That same someone whispers in my head, it's time. Or cues the tears himself, having spent the better part of the day walking there and back for the water. Here's the dentist part. Waiting room smells slick like the magazines. Sample perfumes and a persistent, sterile smell. The upholstery rubbed like the seat of cheap pants all over. In one threadbare spot, what's inside threatens to come out. The homunculus cuts a deal with my fingernail, or must have. They want to dig into the bench stuffing, want to waggle my finger inside. I know I shouldn't, whether I'm too old, too polite, too self-contained. No, I know I can't play with seat holes. But oh, I've got an inch. Just an inch. The hygienist calls my full name and yanks the homunculus along with, I'd rather anything else he sees. Doesn't like this one bit. I cannot perch on the crispy bed, so I flop. All my life long, I've practiced camouflage. I can walk like a reptile, sleep like a clock tower, and stick into a corner like a wad of gum. My hair is just made of protein. My skin is mostly water like everything else. My outside self is malleable, like a work of fiction. But now I'm caught with the question of authorship. I feel alone, like sitting in a chair without the chair, or the left leg falling asleep and feeling almost warm. I haven't got a soul, do I? Do I? Nothing answers. Oh, emotion has its little songs in the body, but was that your stomach or my stomach is a sick little game to play when you're alone. And here's a wild card. Here's a poem I forgot I wrote that I found today. I think it's about Elizabeth Cooperman. But I'm not sure. Once I knew the what of guess what, and it didn't feel like anything. But you can't go around yelling, my wits are dead, and get away. What the dream doesn't want, the jaw takes on. Chew the teeth a few days, and the shiny bits will lose their glaze. I've got 2 doctors, my left leg and my right. Movement is the cure for melancholy. The devil's been in the bathroom a long time. The waiter confirmed she looked angry when she left. I had just taken her photo without asking. Maybe that's it. I couldn't help myself. She looked so lovely in red in this light. Thank you so much.
It's the last one. I do it here. All right, our last reader tonight is UW Professor David Bosworth. His fiction and poetry and literary and cultural essays have been published in numerous journals, His collection of short fiction, The Death of Descartes, was selected by Robert Van Horn for the Drew Hines Literature
Tim, you
Prize.
can cut that short.
Okay. Well, the last two are important.
Okay.
So
Let me know what they are.
This is his last introduction.
most recently, he has contributed to several collective projects on cultural change in America, which have culminated in two books, The Demise of Virtue in Virtual America and Conscientious Thinking, Making Sense in Postmodern Times. And now I'm going to do a lengthy literary analysis followed by a shameless confession.
That's a shameless confession.
Just give us that.
No, again, it's important that it comes in this way. All right, so in The Demise of Virtue, Bosworth reflects on how he learned to improvise when first dropped into a classroom as a new teacher, only half ready, like many of us graduate student TAs. Needing a terminology of his own, Bosworth developed the metaphor of the irritant, which he describes as the introducer of conflict into a story, or the struck flint that sets a story's conflict ablaze. The metaphor invites us to think of short stories as destabilized environments, which only find resolution when the irritant is transformed, say from something painful into something aesthetically beautiful, like the oyster's pearl, and therefore it explains not only the structure of the story, but its purpose as well. Bosworth puts it this way: consider how the very record of the oyster's suffering and of the roughness of the world is both preserved and cultivated by the roundness of a pearl. And now the confession. Last quarter, when I was dropped into my own short story writing class, unready and underprepared, I borrowed the metaphor of the irritant, shamelessly stole it, rather, hoping that it would help me as a teacher, but then I ended up learning right alongside my students. It's only further evidence that even when David Bosworth isn't teaching, we're all still learning something from him. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
I just realized that I was here last year at the last reading, and now this is the last reading. This is really last reading. Now that I think about the last one I'm going to read is eerily appropriate for the last reading. The comic metaphor I use for describing my relationship to finishing books is that it's sort of like cleaning house. I don't do it often enough. And if you've ever seen me when I do clean house, I sort of wander from room to room doing one thing and then another and then another and then another. So the last 10 years I've had 4 major book projects that I've been sort of wandering between. About a year and a half ago, the book that Tim kindly quoted was published. One has just been cleared to land, and that's my circling O'Hare metaphor. Cleared to land in February. And oddly, those 2 were nonfiction, and this is one of the other 2 major, from one of the other 2 major projects I've been working on over these 10 years, and this is a novel called Body Language. It's the first chapter, and therefore doesn't require much in the way of an introduction. It's called, each chapter has a title, and this is called Reading the Final Word, and Body Language is the name of the novel. The alcove's hall was almost dark. I waited there, impatient, so reluctantly at work, for the woman inside to answer my knocks. Sound spiraled up the staircase of the old apartment house like surf and conch. A ringing phone, a thudding door, the distant scudding of a cough, the metal whisk of a spoon against a pot. Inside still though, there was no response. Move it, I thought, anxious for supper and angry at the boss whose call had sent me walking those 4 flights up. I'd fix them up, I'd rent them out, I'd lose my writing's rare momentum, the most elegant riffs aborted mid-sentence to answer all his tenants' calls. Out of sheer pity, I'd even muster a laugh to cover the gaps in his threadbare jokes. But this was going too far, calling me at night, drawing me away, up and away from the music of my evening and the comfort of my wife, my very pregnant wife. This stretched the boundaries of the job. His drafted me to play some low-rent, blue-collar version of the law. The done in denim, I dubbed myself then, knocking harder on the door with misdirected venom. But knowing who I was, I also knew the narrow limits of compliance, what I would and would not do, whose side in this dispute I was really on. Move it, Mary Margaret. Just give me an excuse and I'll gladly go along. From far below, the first or second floor, I could hear a slow song seep into the hall. A mood without a story, it floated up the stairwell, an insinuating sadness whose appeal I could feel, but whose lyrics I actually couldn't fathom. Plugging one ear against that distraction, I flattened the other flush against her door. Come on, come on. Not a word could be heard though, not a hint of a stirring on the inside floors. Come on, no matter how pathetic, I'll gladly pass it on. But my promise of alliance, telepathically sent, only beckoned more silence, a further flaunting of the law. Silently I cursed, tried a final futile knock, and then, bowing to the form of my informal job, announced who I was in a sing-song voice. 1 count, 2. I hated this part, the power I wielded but didn't want, the super's right to intrude day or night without asking into their unsuspecting rooms. Private myself, I balked at this part, but deputized now, and given strict instructions, I didn't have a choice. And so it came to pass that the hand that had, in the hour just past, reared back in shock from a fetal kick. The message was not the greeting lightly tapped that I'd expected, not shy or haunting, but the sharp demand of a being trapped, a sucker punch of will and wanting. And so it came to pass that that same hired hand, weary from the day's long hours and warily reminded of its recent failure to maintain composure, selected and then slipped the correctly numbered key into the lock. Father, I thought, as if citing the right term might authorize me to re-audition for the part. Steadying the key, I turned its brass blade inside the oiled slot. Next time I was sure, however hard the kick, next time I promised my hand wouldn't flinch. I heard the deadbolt drop. Relaxing my grip, I helplessly watched as, like a ship leaving dock without its captain, the door sprang back. With my arm outstretched, I stared, rapt as it pulsed and then stopped, exposing a gap about 1/2 foot, the width of a book, as if the dorm room in some Catholic school where shy lovers clutched, conforming to the rules of revelation as recently revised by the Dean of Student Housing, a liberated nun. At first, the inner silence seemed unchanged. I hadn't yet detected the moment's subtle oral textures, its subliminal brain. I hadn't yet seen the hidden host of living things waiting in the wings for their moment to emerge. Softly, as if a nervous benediction, a mere murmur of hope without conviction, I called out the tenant's name, rehearsing as I waited her own soft reply, lilting, Irish, an explanation for her silence, which in fact never came. It was only then, lightly pushing on the door as I cautiously leaned in, that I first began to sense the almost viscous surge of stench emerging from within. The odor, strangely I recollected later, was that of musty sweaters in the closets of the old, but so condensed, so intense, that it vivified forever the meaning of recoil. And suddenly I knew without stepping in why, for all those 30 days and nights, Miss Sullivan had failed to pay her rent. I didn't move, wouldn't breathe through my nose, refusing to pronounce the found word in my mind. Like an inept symbol, Gothic cartoon, a single fly buzzed out, staggered more than flew, as if reeling from the excess contained inside. In the dim and oily glow of a 40-watt bulb thought to help stretch a government check to her electric bill, I numbly made a note of the cheaply printed saints, the plastic-framed popes and virgins, Mary, all the sunny blonde stairs everywhere, it seemed. of the Christian Savior, a kind of holy hall of fame, row after row, which like stained glass tattoos on the skin of the room sanctified the walls, fading floral paper. A coil of beads, a hard prayer for each need, lay curled atop the table. Beneath it, I saw a plated silver cross, a crumpled dollar bill, riotous laders of roughly opened mail, nothing it later proved from a hand that she knew. Just flyers for sales and bulk rate pleas from missions of mercy. So many orphanage priests and Carmelite nurses, each offering special prayers against disease and despair to those who would ease the plight of the needy. Dear sister, they began beneath the doe-sized stares of dark-skinned children. Help us, feed us. Dear sister in Christ, 75 and she'd been no one's bride except for Jesus. A lifetime she must have waited for this tryst, the penetration of the mysterious, and now I, like some junior dorm advisor, a minion of the prim pretending to be righteous, had burst in on her like this to catch her in the act of her violation. One count, two. Still I didn't move. Like a burnished copper thorn, the key still protruded from the flank of the door. My hand still half extended, but closing now, defensive, as if shying once again from the baby's bony form. In the silent, empty alcove on the threshold of her entry, I waited, kept on waiting like an outposted sentry, alarmed by a noise on the darkened periphery for my own response. Retreat, advance, any definite command, something apropos to say, a who goes there, a cry or a curse, or a pursed-lipped prayer. Next door, signaled very softly by the almost intimate squeaking of shoeless feet on the hardwood floor, I heard another tenant stir, his slow pacing tracing the faint script of a suggestion across my mind's blank board. Here, at last, was a place to turn. Inside there'd be a phone, the fastest route to help. Inside, too, someone to wait with after the call. An ally, a friend, an ear to receive like the mouth of rancid swig, the taboo word. Someone with whom to share and then dilute the meaning of the news, to pass it back and forth, time after time, until, as with a ritual parade of reluctant goodbyes, the words became rote, the feeling remote, more long-distance flowers ordered by phone, more sentiments cloned into greeting card rhymes. I'd done my duty, after all. I answered the call, I had come there, I had found her. I would even try to mourn her, but it was someone else's job, a cop, a coroner, someone better paid than I, to touch her, to come close, to dispose of the body. It was someone else's sorry mission to see her where she fell, and so carry home that night, banked like an ember in the powdery ashes of abstract memory, a portrait for the smell, a Kodak color slide more vivid than life. He then, and not I, could lay awake at night projecting that image onto the brow of his sleeping wife. He and not I could relive the discovery over and over while waiting pillow-propped for dawn to arrive. The faint footsteps ceased. They were waiting, it seemed, waiting for me. But even then I didn't turn, didn't step, didn't heed my own words. Instead, I swayed there, seemed to hover like a flame between two tapers, drawn back from escape toward Miss Sullivan's doorway by what seems, even now, an appalling urge. It wasn't duty that called me, not bravado, nor grief, not some subtle form of pride, but a dry and unrelenting burning inside, a primitive, centerless, ravenous itch, a craving beyond naming, so witless and deep and immune to all fear, my species' own lemming call to the sea, that even I, body shy and a prude about pain, was tempted by it. Even the man who, afraid of the train of thought they unloose, refused to read his wife's childbirth books, who already dreamed of the complications they reveal, the ruptured veins, the dislocated hips, those tiny hairless heads with their grape-stained lips throttled at birth, Could irony get any worse than this? Babies killed by the cords that had nurtured them. Even he, the cowardly pre-father, wanted to draw close, wanted to see her, to see it, to read the final word, to know at last all there was to know. As though a sun-starved rose, I leaned toward the light. I pushed on the door. Stepping into her entry, I was instantly enclosed by a stench so strong that it burst through the narrow boundaries of smell, swamping every sense with its relentless self, becoming all at once a taste, a color, nicotine yellow, a syrupy touch, and channeling a sound, a kind of low-pitched moan that blended somehow with the buzz of small wings that now busied her rooms like voices chanting before a wall. I saw her at once through the open bedroom door, so close and yet apart, her body centering the stillness of the room's half dark. She lay belly up across the width of her bed with her knees and neck bending over each edge, and with her soft spots, all the secrets of her sex unfurled there atop the narrow altar of her rest like an open scroll. The thighs, they were spread, they were slack, as though slowly merging casings of half-rendered fat beneath an ivory slit which seemed to glow. The calves, they were black, they mourned themselves. The feet were blacker still, and they dangled there swollen, their toes down pointing, their black arches curled, as if they'd been bruised by the force it had taken in some violent backward somersaulting extrication to propel herself out of this world. The head, it lay out of sight, thank God, dipping over the edge and into the dark of the other side, cast back there an arc of complete abandonment to the cause. What had happened to the mouth, I couldn't help but wonder, repulsed by myself. Did the eyes, unblinking, still stare out? And yet, as in a poem's subtle syntax, it wasn't just her parts separately defined that spelled out her message, but their interrelation, the utter lack of tension, resistance, limbs that had lost their punctuation, the slurring, the melding of the body's phrases, as in the inarticulate slump of a newborn baby, or the sandbag sleep that sometimes comes after vindictive labor, exorbitant love. The fluids from this ravishment, though, had more than stained the sheets. They had drained, they had seeped through the gills of her ribs, through the pores of her skin and the pall of her slip, through the bedspread, the blanket, the sagging mattress, dripping, slowly dripping from the lowest point in the tufted ticking, to settle in a puddle on the hardwood floor, down, always down, relentlessly drawn by the irresistible pull of gravity's law. 30 days she had lain there, and what had she learned? The word of all words, the names that were engraved in her Savior's sacred book. 30 more, and she might have dissolved, might have seeped, it seemed, through all 4 floors and back into the ground, as if, as was promised for the soul in those cardboard homilies she had taped to her walls, the body too must return to its source. I stared. The word deliquescent suddenly flashed, the answer to a question that I'd failed to ask inside my head. As if in high school again, I heard or seemed to hear the chastening words of my old German teacher, "This Studentin is what happens when." I stared, I waited and stared. How long had I been there? A moment, a minute, a month of my own, my wife waiting downstairs, our baby kicking in her womb. The stillness, the stalling, all the rows of glowing saviors, the mind slow swallowing, the mulling of the wings, the gnawing of small things on the skin of my composure, its meaning then arriving with a shiver of revulsion. Jesus, I said. Where had they come from? How had they found her? With the windows down, the door tightly closed, it seemed that they must have been hiding inside her. Secret agents of decay suffused within her flesh and awaiting their day. Pale, abiding, dormant larvae. Jesus, I said, whipping my head. Suddenly I couldn't breathe for the stench. As I reared back quickly, the printed flowers on the walls released themselves, and, gravity revoked, they seemed to spin then wildly in the dim-lit air. Dizzy, I grasped at the brass doorknob and, stumbling backward, pulled on it hard. The litany of wings abruptly cut off as the latch snapped shut. Gone, silent, empty, censored, gone. Only the stench, clinging in a cloud about my head, had managed to follow me back into the hall. Gagging once, I covered my mouth. Move it, I thought. I started to run, then quickly stopped. The dark hall, the closed door, the glimmerings of sounds, imagined or heard, just 2 quick steps across the alcove floor. I banged on the door as hard as I could, too hard, too fast, the jackhammering burst, the jimmy guards rattling loudly as they shook, footsteps drawing nearer behind the wood. I called out the tenant's name, my passkey, the magic phrase, hearing in reply his methodical releasing of locks and chains, seeing, as I waited, the first cherry flash of inside light, just a finger-wide slice, sensing in the pause, then, the taut leash of caution, tethering the voice that invisibly emerged from the innocence of the other side. What's going on? I paused, silent, empty, censored, gone. Swallowing hard, I felt my mind tense, then contract as I tried to compose an articulate response. I felt door after door beginning to shut, framing, containing, safely closing up, ashes into urns, vowels unturned by consonants. Miss Sullivan, I said. The door drew back and a face appeared, watching me assume from the safety of its rooms my hilarious pose of uncertainty, watching as, like some feckless palace guard, the tyrant's lover's brother-in-law, I retreated, tiptoeing, my pistola still holstered from the coup d'etat atop her bed. Miss Sullivan, yes? I think she's dead.
David, thank you so much. That was great. Can't wait to read the rest of it. Hi guys, I'm Abby. I wanted to take a minute, as a few of us have mentioned up here tonight. It's the last reading of the year, which is super exciting and also very sad. I've been doing some of the behind-the-scenes work for Castalia, and that is absolutely not true. But I wanted to take a minute just to reiterate our thanks to Hugo House for all their support and encouragement this year. Using this space, being a part of the Seattle community is just awesome. And also for all of you guys who are here tonight, whether this is your first Castalia or whether you've been coming to the events all year, it's great to have you here. And we really appreciate that as well. And I would encourage you guys to look for the next round of readings in the fall. That being said, this would not have been possible without all of the great team who's been doing the work this year. So I'd love a round of applause for Michelle Anderson, Tim Anderson, Gabrielle Bates, Rachel Allen, Kristen Delano, Beckett Lee, Aaron McCoy, and Tasha Brennan. And without any further ado, I'm excited to hand over the reins to next year's great group of writers who will be taking over. So look for their events in the fall. And welcome to the helm Daniel Cecil, Aya Gold, Kim Halstead, Cameron Louie, Aaron Lynch, Aaron McCoy, Kelly McMeekin, Maria Mills, Lauren Schlesinger, Catherine Walker, and Jane Youngberg. Thank you guys for buy drinks, tip Drew, buy books, and get your cars moved by 10.